Hey guys, Jake from 80/20 Media here. Today I'm going to be talking about the best performance upgrades for the Duramax LBZ. The Duramax LBZ is one of the more desirable Duramaxes, both for reliability and for performance modifications. The main reason is it's one of the last pre-emissions Duramaxes. Although it does have a catalytic converter and exhaust gas recirculation, it does not have DPF and SCR and all the other emissions equipment that the newer diesels have, which give it an edge from a reliability and a performance standpoint. A couple of basic bolt-on modifications can pretty easily add well over 100 wheel horsepower to the Duramax LBZ, but you have to be careful because of transmission limitations. In this video, I'm going to go ahead and talk about the power limits of the Duramax LBZ, and then jump into a handful of the best bolt-on performance modifications for this engine. So first off, a stock LBZ is going to dyno about 300 wheel horsepower. The first limitation that you're going to run into is the factory Allison 1000 transmission. These transmissions are only good until about 400 wheel horsepower. So you really only have 100 wheel horsepower of room until you start needing to look at transmission upgrades. After the transmission limitation, you're next going to run into the stock turbocharger. That's good for about 500 wheel horsepower. If you really push it to the max, you can probably get closer to 550 wheel horsepower out of it. That's going to be on a max effort tune. And so 500 is about the safe limit of the factory turbocharger. The injectors are going to need to be upgraded right around the same time the turbocharger is. The injectors are good for about 500 to 550 wheel horsepower. But again, if you plan on running a pretty consistent 500 wheel horsepower, you'll want to look at upgrading those rather than running them at full capacity. The rest of the fueling system, which is the CP3, is good for about 625 to 650 wheel horsepower, but a lift pump is definitely recommended early on and before a tune is added, as is true with any Duramax. And then the pistons are prone to cracking at around 600 wheel horsepower. So 600 wheel horsepower is probably right around the safe limit, where if you want to push beyond that, it's going to cost a lot of money in upgrades and modifications, and you're going to have to start cracking into the engine to do some advanced internal upgrades. So before we jump into the modifications here, let's just go ahead and talk about two supporting modifications. The first one being a lift pump. This is a Duramax. It doesn't come with a lift pump from the factory, so one is absolutely recommended just to help support the CP3 and the fueling system. And I'd recommend adding a lift pump before you even get into tuning, as it'll help save your CP3, it'll help save your injectors as well. It's a very worthwhile supporting modification for performance upgrades. And then the second thing is going to be the transmission limitations. As I mentioned, you're tapped out at about 400 wheel horsepower before you're going to start doing some damage to the transmission. You can install a Transgo junior shift kit and transmission tuning, which will help hold a little bit more power. But if you're really looking at pushing anything beyond plus 100 wheel horsepower, you're going to want to start looking at some more advanced transmission upgrades. There are a bunch of upgrade kits that range from 1,500 to 3,000 plus, depending on what your power goals are. But for $1,500, you can get a transmission upgrade kit that can hold about 550 wheel horsepower reliably. And there's even one for $2,500 that can hold 800 wheel horsepower. My recommendation would be once you get beyond that 550 or 600 level, that's when you're going to want to look at getting a fully built transmission, which is probably going to run you closer to $5,000 or $6,000. But there are some cheaper alternatives that'll help you hold a bit more power and allow you to push things into the 500 levels. So with that covered, the hands down best modification for a Duramax LBZ is going to be tuning and transmission tuning. Tuning is where your big power gains are going to come from. That's going to allow you to run more boosts, which is going to create your big power gains. You got a couple options here when it comes to tuning. The probably top of the line tuning options, if you really want to get some custom tuning and dial things in the best, are going to be EFI Live or HP tuners. That's going to allow you to get custom custom tuning as well as do transmission tuning to help your transmission at these higher power levels. If you're just looking at adding a little bit of extra power and putting some basic bolt-ons on there, and you're not planning on getting to a level where you're putting the transmission at risky power levels, then you can stick with a more budget-friendly, handheld, can-tune tuning device like the PPE accelerator, which is also only going to cost about $450 compared to, you know, $1,000 to $1,200 for EFI Live or HP tuners. So that's a good option if you're looking at keeping power levels modest and just looking to wake your truck up a little bit, but don't want to start getting into transmission upgrades and more advanced modifications. The second upgrade on my list is going to be a cold air intake. Once you're tuned running higher boost levels, it's important to bring more air into the turbocharger to help support the turbocharger at those higher boost levels. It's going to help improve the efficiency of the turbocharger, which is going to allow it to run a little bit cooler, and it's going to free up some power as well. You're also going to notice some small fuel economy gains, and so it's worth it from that standpoint alone. Now, some people say you don't need an intake until you're 500 wheel horsepower plus, but in my opinion, it's going to help improve the efficiency of your turbocharger, and it's going to help free up some power. It's going to help lower your EGTs and your engine temperatures a bit, and so it's a good modification before you get to that 500 horsepower limit regardless. The next upgrade here is going to be an exhaust system. There are a couple different ways to look at this depending on what you're trying to do with your truck. The LBZ does have a catalytic converter or a diesel oxidation cat. Depending on whether or not you want to leave your catalytic converter there, if you have to for emissions reasons, or if you're looking to get rid of it, you can either get a downpipe and then get a catback exhaust system, or you can get a full turboback system. The full turboback system is of course going to be the best from a performance standpoint. It's going to have the most impact on back pressure and EGT reduction, but getting a downpipe and a catback portion of the exhaust is also still going to be a good option if you want to keep the factory emission equipment there. So that covers it for my modifications here. Outside of our supporting modifications of transmission upgrades and a lift pump, it's really just tuning an intake and an exhaust system. That's going to allow you to add about 100 wheel horsepower. If you start looking at transmission upgrades, then you can push this to 150, maybe even 200 wheel horsepower before you have to start looking at additional modifications. The LBZ is a pretty good power plant. You can get these modifications for less than a couple $1,000s. Very cost effective to add a bit of additional power here. A couple other things that you can consider if you're really looking to optimize everything, reduce any restrictions within airflow. You can look at getting an upgraded Y-bridge, up pipes, intercooler piping, an upgraded intercooler if you're looking to improve reliability, but those things aren't quite necessary for the power levels that we're talking about in this video unless you've got some money to spend and are really looking to do everything that you can to maximize airflow, efficiency, reliability. Then I would just stick with the things that I mentioned on my list, like tuning, intake, and exhaust. And that covers it for performance upgrades for the LBZ. If you guys appreciated this video, please click that like button, subscribe to the channel, and stay tuned for future Duramax videos.